Hey everyone, welcome back to the Hyperbolic Time Chamber. This is part 2 of my ayahuasca experience, my ayahuasca journey. In this video, I wanted to talk about my ayahuasca experience itself and also my experience and time at Spiritquest and the Spiritquest Sanctuary. So I go to Lima. I head to Lima from Toronto and I had to get to Iquitos. Iquitos is specifically another city in Peru where Spiritquest is, and Spiritquest is actually on the Amazon River, sort of tucked away, right in the middle of nature, which obviously is intentionally so that when participants show up, they can be sort of focused on themselves and healing and just being in a positive and calming presence or environment, really. So I started noticing some of the participants that I was going to see or probably going to be working with, the people who were part of my cohort at Lima itself. And that was primarily because we had an introduction email come out in terms of, Selva setting forward some of the rules and guidelines. And really, that was an opportunity for us to introduce each other or introduce ourselves to each other and just share a few words on our journey and our experience that's bringing us to this work. So I started noticing some people and it was cool, but I kind of kept to myself at that point because I just figured we'll probably just get to know each other as we get into Spirit Quest and get settled. So we land in Iquitos, and Selva is there to sort of receive us. And we wait to make sure that everybody from our particular group, our retreat cohort, is there. We connect with Selva and we get on a bus that then takes us to our actual retreat center, to Spirit Quest. And so when we get to Spirit Quest, it was really beautiful. It's sort of like something out of a storybook almost. It's a fully wooden structure. It's sort of built up on this incline on the riverbank of the Amazon. And it was really great when we got there. We got greeted by the staff, and we really got to meet the operating staff that makes Spirit Quest function smoothly for all of us that show up there. And first things first was we got our rooms assigned to us, and we were escorted there so we can kind of get ourselves settled in and set up. And the rooms were really cool, very very minimalistic, really nothing fancy. Obviously, no extraneous technology or devices, and that makes a lot of sense because really. The encouraging point was to be off devices as much as possible. Obviously, for traveling purposes, I had brought my laptop and my phone and things like that, but I really kept them aside and only used them from time to time from like a information and educational perspective where I wanted to look up some material that was relevant to the work we were doing. And of course, the internet was also not great. Probably by design, but it kind of worked out either way because that reduced the temptation to be distracted in any other way, really. Also in the room, they had a standing fan, which was very helpful because obviously we're in the Amazon, the climate was very hot. So without that, it would have been probably quite difficult to fall asleep, and it was a huge help to have. So one of the first things that happened or kind of officially kicked things off was a talking stick circle. And the talking stick circle is essentially an opportunity for all of us to come together and sit around and really take turns talking about why we're here and what we're trying to work through, to whatever degree we feel comfortable sharing, of course. But essentially just kind of, an opportunity to reflect and share in each other's experiences. And with that first talking stick circle, it was really interesting to hear from each and every participant, and I was able to sort of give my thoughts as well. And it was kind of a moving, emotional interaction because I think everybody kind of was opening themselves up to each other and really trying to be present to why they were there, what were they looking to work on, and what kind of help they were looking to get. So it was really nice. And then as that wrapped up, we also got a better idea of, just the retreat breakdown in terms of the schedule, right? We had an idea that just through the application process, but it was laid out in more detail, just on what things were going to look like over the next few days by Selva. So after the talking stick circle, really the rest of the day was just time for ourselves to get settled in and do whatever else we needed to. Obviously, Spiritquest and this particular retreat included food and meals. And I mentioned meals because there's a preamble and a precursor to the work, that we were about to do. And that was, we had some steps or prep steps to take before coming to the retreat center. So we were basically asked to abstain from a variety of activities, but primarily also food, certain types of foods. So everything from meat to fat to spices, refined sugar, a couple of different things that we had to abstain from for at least for a period of 2 weeks before the retreat. And I think a few days even up to the retreat, we were even asked to cut out salt. So really, there were certain dietary things that we had to be mindful of, and these aspects were carried through with the food that we were having at the retreat. So all the food that was cooked at the retreat for our time frame was very neutral, very bland, no extraneous spices, nothing fancy. It was really meant to be food really from a fuel perspective, to sustain us, and nothing to entice the senses or sort of be exciting in any way. And it wasn't bad. It was definitely an adjustment, but I think because we were already asked to start preparing ahead of time, we kind of fell in line with what we had to do food wise and diet wise once we got there. So that was something important that I wanted to mention, because it is something that they were very clear on. It was not a negotiable. It was not a nice to have. It was, please make sure to follow these steps and guidelines, as this will be beneficial for you in the work that you're coming to do. So before I jump into the ceremony aspects, I want to cover just a couple of basics in terms of ayahuasca and what it is and how it's sort of playing a role here. Ayahuasca in itself is a vine. It is primarily grown or naturally found and grown in the Amazon region. It's called yahe in some tribes in some countries throughout the Amazon region. And so this vine, what's unique about it is it does not have any psychedelic compounds. But what it does have that's important for the ayahuasca brew, so the vine itself is called ayahuasca, but the brew is also called the ayahuasca brew. What it contains is a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. Monoamine oxidase is an enzyme produced by the liver. Its primary function seems to be to neutralize DMT that is ingested orally. And DMT is actually the primary psychedelic compound in the ayahuasca brew. However, it is not contained within the ayahuasca vine itself. It is actually a byproduct of other plants that are brought into the ayahuasca brew and the mixture. So one being the chacruna plant, and there are a few other plants that come together to create the ayahuasca brew. But the vine has this unique property that it inhibits this enzyme in our liver. So this then allows us to drink the ayahuasca brew and ingest DMT orally, and for us to essentially undergo and have the experience that we are meant to have by partaking in this plant medicine. So moving on to the ceremony aspects of my retreat at the Spiritquest Sanctuary, we had essentially 4 ayahuasca ceremonies. We had 1 day on, 1 day off, next day on, next day off, and then the 3rd and 4th ceremonies were back to back. And as part of the ceremony preparation, we did get to see some really cool things. One was actually the ayahuasca vine being prepared to be made into the brew. Essentially, the vine is beat for the juices to be released, and the maestros actually displayed this for us. So Don Robert, Donna Eliana, his wife, and Don Carlos, his son, were 3 of the primary Banco Ayahuasqueros, the shamanic healers that worked with Selva at Spiritquest, and they were the ones who really kind of took center stage at the ceremonies to make sure that they went well and they oversaw everything, and they kind of administered the plant to us. There was also a mapacho ceremony. So mapacho is sacred tobacco, and there are a lot of spiritual connotations and reasons to why spiritual tobacco and mapacho is used in these ceremonies, but it's sort of used as a blessing to bless the brew itself and sort of give thanks to the sort of the cardinal spirits and a few other interesting things. And we were able to partake in that as well. So I'll probably focus on 2 out of the 4 ayahuasca ceremonies because they, in particular, it was the first and the second, were probably the most vivid and most profound feeling. The third and fourth were very powerful. I had a hard time recalling a lot of things. And so I did do some journaling, and I do have some details that I'll actually read out to you in the video itself. But those are, the first and second are probably the ones that I'm going to focus on most to illustrate my experience and how things went. The ceremonies started around 7 p.m. We actually had a specific space. It's called a maloka. We had an ayahuasca maloka, which is like a ceremonial hut where all the participants, it's spacious enough for all the participants to come and get themselves set up. And essentially you have the option of either lying sort of down, not flat necessarily, but being able to comfortably lie down on a mat, or you can pull up a chair and sit down and make yourself comfortable that way during the ceremony. But around 7 p.m., people start coming to the maloka and getting themselves set up. And the maestros make their way as well. There's a blessing of sorts that takes place, and after that, you basically come up to drink the ayahuasca brew. An important part of the blessing process and sort of throughout the night itself is the Icaros. The Icaros are sort of spiritual songs that are sung by the maestros. So they're sung during the blessing phase. They're sung throughout the night to sort of guide the experience for all the participants. And they're actually also sung in the end of the night to close out the ceremony formally. You are allowed to stay through the whole night in the hut itself, in the maloka itself, or you are able to head back to your own room when the ceremony ends. And the way you know the ceremony's finished is when they light a single candle. So when the ceremony starts, it's actually really dark outside. So naturally, due to the weather and the climate, it gets darker by 7:30. But also, all the lights in the Spiritquest Sanctuary are turned off. So when you come into the maloka, there's a couple of lights there intentionally, and really candlelight, natural light. And once the ceremony starts, at some point, all lights are extinguished. So first ceremony happens. Myself and all the other participants are there and getting ourselves set up by like 7:30. It's pitch black. Everybody's there, quiet, waiting for the blessing to start and things to kick off. And the maestros come and they do the blessing and we start. And essentially, it just kind of goes in order of who's closest, in whatever order people are sitting, that they come one by one and drink the brew. So when it was my turn, I go up, I drink the brew. And regarding the brew, this is something that I think is very important for me to mention. It tastes horrible, unfortunately. It does not taste great. It's very, very hard to describe. I've heard people describe it in many different ways in videos and other podcasts, but if I had to try and summarize, it feels like it's a combination of like old coffee, gasoline, like it's a really, really strange mixture of flavors. Bearable enough that you can get it down, but not something that you would ever want to drink unless you have to. So let me put it like that, right? So the brew itself, we have it's a big quantity when you're up there and you're drinking, and I think at least it takes about 3 to 4 big gulps, and you drink the brew and then you go sit back down. And so typically it takes about 20 to 40 minutes for the effect of the medicine and the plant to take, to take root, to start working. But in the meantime, you kind of sit and you're just being still and being quiet and, being present really. And the other part of ayahuasca that probably, is often discussed is purging. Purging is really um, a way of releasing. And there are many forms of release. So everything from vomiting to having to go to the toilet to yawning to shivering to shaking and everything in between. So it depends on person to person. Some people have one or two of these types of purging. Some people might have others. Some, in rare cases, actually don't purge in that physical sense. They might just sit with the medicine all night and just feel what they feel and see what they see. So it's really very tailored to the person. And one of the things I remember Selva talking to us regarding ayahuasca and the plant medicine is the medicine doesn't give you what you want; it gives you what you need. So that was a really interesting thought that I kept with me through this. Um, but essentially, most people do purge in the traditional sense of vomiting. That's a pretty typical sign. So I'm sitting there and waiting for the medicine to take effect. And 30-40 minutes goes by, and now I'm very aware of the fact that some of my participants have started purging. Some of them are vomiting, and some of them are, yeah, they're vomiting pretty aggressively. And we were given these big buckets with water, that was sat right beside where we were sitting, so that when we do have to vomit, we're able to vomit into the bucket so it doesn't splash out and splash anywhere and cause a mess. So I'm at this point seeing certain things and kind of some imagery, and I'll read about that in my journal entry, but I'm not purging in the traditional sense. My purging while in the Maloka was yawning. I was yawning a lot for hours, just long, tired yawns, as if, I've been exhausted for years, months. I don't know. It's hard to describe, but it was just these big, long, tired yawns that kept coming, kept coming. And I think at one point I was also crying. That is also a form of purging, but not crying actively, not intentionally. My eyes were just leaking water. So it was really interesting, but also part of me was wondering, am I doing something wrong because I'm not vomiting? And I think after doing a lot of the research, you're almost, as much as they tell you not to, you kind of try and ready yourself in certain ways to be like, all right, this is what I'm going to have to deal with. This is what's going to happen. And that didn't happen that way for me. So the night goes on, and the ceremony goes on. It begins around 7, but it goes on till about 1 o'clock, 1 a.m. in the morning. So it's a rather long period, right? That you're sitting with the medicine, that you're working through it. And while you're under the influence of the medicine, one specific unique attribute is that you feel very fragile, very weak, very vulnerable, really. So much so that if and when you do have to go to the washroom, you had to put up your hand and say baño, which is toilet or washroom in Spanish, and one of the staff would come and assist you. And I definitely had to do that. A couple of the participants had to do that as well, and you feel as if you are a old fragile person, or what a young baby might feel like. You need to be almost held and guided to and from the place. And I think it's just part of the medicine in the sense of cleansing, but it's just the effect that you have. So that was a really unique experience to undergo. So I'm going through the night, and I'm not purging the same traditional method that I expected to, and nothing intense is happening yet. It feels intense, but not. I'm not seeing anything intense or nothing in that traditional or expected way. And so the night goes on, and it finishes. The ceremony finally finishes, and at that point, as I mentioned, you have a choice to go back to your room. And I was like, I feel okay. I mean, I feel fragile and really weak in a sense, but I feel up to getting back to my room and going to bed. I don't need to stay at the Maloka. Fine. So I make my way back to my room, and as I said, I had the fan there, and the fan is just really nice and cooling to fall asleep under. And getting back to the room is really when my purging in the traditional sense started. For whatever reason, when I had slept or got into bed and I turned on the fan, the cold air just activated me for whatever reason. I immediately, very quickly, needed to vomit. And the thankful part about all this is the first thing I had done when I went into my room was just had the notion and the thought to go grab my garbage bucket from my washroom and put it beside my bed. I think I had this intuition that just be safe, be smart, have this there. You might need it, you know. And boy, did I need it. So um, the cold air hits me, and within seconds, I'm vomiting hard. I mean, I don't think I've ever vomited like that. I don't think I've ever. Yeah, it was intense. It was gut wrenching. And those are, I think, some of the words that I use specifically um, in my journal entry. And I think that's a good point right now where I'll read it and then kind of discuss through it. Last night's events are hard to put into words. I drank the brew and felt fine for the most part. I saw some visuals, patterns, fractals, but nothing extraordinary. I also didn't seem to be purging in the traditional sense, i.e., vomiting. Once the ceremony ended, I promptly went back to my room to fall asleep under the breeze of the fan. That is when my real purging began. It was gut wrenching and nearly took all the breath out of my lungs. What followed was hours of images, visions, faces, too many to count, now too faint to remember. I have been given some information. I will need to be patient to understand it. So, as I was saying, that's really when things kind of took this very deep spiritual turn for me. Um, I can't even really put into words what I saw and what I felt. I mean, I'll be able to describe certain aspects of it, but just you have to feel it. Like I am doing the best I can in plain language to put it, but it is truly indescribable. Um, but there were a couple of messages and sort of, you know, pieces of wisdom, I guess you could say, that I felt like that I got. One was very powerful, and it was that we are all one and that we are all love. We are all part of the universe. The universe is part of us. We are part of it. We are part of the divine. The divine is part of us. It was sort of this beautiful feeling of being connected to everything and everyone and feeling an immense sense of gratitude. And that was probably the biggest, most profound feeling um, from that first ceremony. And throughout all the ceremonies that I feel like kept coming back, but that was in that first ceremony, that's where that hit me the most, in the most clearest way, in the hardest way. And so the night goes on. I'm having this intense experience, and finally I do go to sleep. And you have to get back up at a certain time because there's a step in the morning called a flower bath. It's sort of a ceremonial cleansing process that the maestros do for us. And the advice is really the suggestion is go and have a bath before you come to the flower bath because you are not meant to have a shower after the flower bath. The medicine and the plant or the flower bath itself is to be sort of treated like medicine, that it'll be on you and stay with you throughout the day, right? So we get up in the morning, we come out to sort of the communal area, and you can tell everybody's gone through some very intense things. You know, And so we have our flower bath, and there's another following talking stick circle. So after every ceremony, there was a talking stick circle where you came and really talked through what you went through, what messages you got, and whatever you want to really talk about and share with the group. And it was really, really, really powerful because there's a lot of things that we experience, but there's so much we learn and experience through other people's experiences. And that was an amazing opportunity just to hear from different people and what they had went through. And so after that, and in between the ceremonies themselves, we did have a lot of downtime where you could basically do anything. You could sort of take your time in terms of exercising if you wanted to, just with the space that's there, do any yoga, meditate. I read a lot of books because there was a pretty nice library there with a lot of books that were donated by past retreat participants. So I was able to get through a lot of books, which was a lot of fun. And that also was great because you got to meet and really hang out with the participants and build relationships and then build bonds and get to know people. That was really cool. The other cool thing that we got to do that Spiritquest has been doing now for a very long time, since the time that Don Howard had founded Spiritquest, was we actually got to go and visit and spend time with certain traditional indigenous tribes around that Amazon area. So we got to visit the Bora tribe, the Kukama tribe, the Moroibue tribe, and the Shipibo tribe. The Shipibo tribe actually visited us at Spearquest. And it was amazing to see these tribes and these cultures still sort of living, in a traditional way, in an ancestral way, to see everybody from elders to children and everyone in between. It was really, really cool. And we got to participate and kind of do some dances with them. And, it was a lot of fun interactive elements where we were able to share our culture, but also learn so much from theirs. The second ceremony for me was distinctly different from the first, and the easiest way for me to explain it would be to start off by reading my journal entry. Um, so last night was quite a different experience in comparison to the first night. The medicine took effect quite quickly. For the first while or so, I felt my body vibrate vigorously. I felt it buzz and whir. It almost felt like there were these massive entities in front of me, too large to see anything but their lower legs, and they were running some sort of diagnostics on me, sort of like maintenance being done on a vehicle. Again, I find it hard to recollect all the things I experienced. I do remember feeling love for all those around me, my fellow retreat participants, the staff and organizers, my family. I felt a strong sense of appreciation for them. Yeah, and it's it's so hard to put into words, but I really did feel like in the second ceremony, I mean, this might sound a bit corny, but it was like the Matrix in that I was seeing a lot of green, just sort of things flowing in front of me, and I sensed these entities, this presence of being worked on, being fixed, being recalibrated in a way. Um, and what was interesting with that second ceremony is that I did purge, and I did purge in the Maloka during the ceremony as opposed to finishing and going back. And to quickly touch on the third and fourth ceremonies, what I did sense out of it, and it was probably the third ceremony, is, and again, this most of what I'm saying from a feeling and spiritual side of things might seem a bit strange or abstract, but it's really the only way I can put it into words. But I did feel like I was in a different plane of consciousness. There's a lot of psychedelic art, there's a lot of ayahuasca art that a lot of the tribes create. And it really did feel like I was in a place where it's sort of like an in-between, where it's like a spirit realm, really. Um, it's hard to put into words in what you see, but I did see certain therianthropes. Therianthropes are images or beings that are part animal, part human. So I saw some imagery like that, very similar to sort of Egyptian gods, which was kind of interesting. But I actually had this weird sense, and I came back and I shared this with my family, is it felt like that's where you go when you pass. And my grandmother being older and up in age and potentially being on the last, decade or so of her life, it's obviously, it wears on us that we might not have as much time with her. But I really got this sense of calm and peace knowing that this seems like where my grandma is going to. It felt like that's where you kind of transition over to. And it felt like a peaceful, beautiful place. And I remember distinctly feeling that happiness or joy for my grandmother, in that when the time comes, she's going to a good place. That was a really beautiful feeling. So yeah, that in a nutshell is what my ayahuasca experience was like. Um, it was intense. It was at times exhausting. It was work. And I think that is really the best way to put it. And it's the way that was, you know, described to us, and the point that was reaffirmed to us throughout all the in between conversations and discussions and interactions is ayahuasca has immense benefits. It is a wonderfully transformational plant medicine, but it is not something that you can interact with at a surface level, because it really goes deep and works deep. And so that requires you to come with a certain awareness and attitude and perspective. Hey everyone, just a quick note before I wrap this video up. If the part one seems a bit disjointed and disconnected from part two, there's a reason for that. I'd actually recorded part one as a pretty long hour and a half segment, and I was trying to break it up and sort of process it and edit it and put it together. And in that process, I managed to keep part one, and due to some technical difficulties brought on by myself, I lost the rest of the footage. So I had to record part two separately, and part three, which I'll also be working on soon. So just wanted to point that out, that if it looked, tonally a little off or a little different, that's really what it was. But aside from that, I just did want to say that I hope this was informational or educational, or just, was helpful in any way. For me, I benefited a lot from just watching videos on people's ayahuasca experience and certain things that they went through and what brought them to that work and to this particular plant medicine. So I hope it was useful to anyone watching. And if it was, I'd really appreciate a like. If you're liking the channel content, please feel free to subscribe, and you can hit the bell icon to get notified when videos get put up. If you've worked with ayahuasca or any other plant medicines, and you have any thoughts or any questions or any feedback, I'd love to hear from you. So please feel free to drop a comment. Take care, everyone, and I'll catch you on the next one.